So my name is Shulamit. Ambalu. I'm one of the rabbis at Shulamit. We are a community of about 650 people also in North London, but further north, the outer reaches of Barnet. And I don't know what else Josh said, but we've been as a team kind of struggling and learning about this and very consciously thinking about it for quite a long time.
Great. Thank you. So apologies, for some reason, my internet has just chosen now, after a day of being incredibly obliging and helpful, it's chosen this moment to start being difficult. So I apologize for that. If you lose me, I will try and go to somewhere else in the house and try to use a different device. So just a few words of introduction to this evening. So as Saf said, what we're going to be doing this evening is really looking at a kind of higher level at the issue of what our services can and will look like moving forwards. We're going to focus in particular around areas of tefillah, though clearly some of this stuff applies to other aspects of our communal life, also to learning life, to our social engagement as well. As I said, what we're not going to be doing this evening, because it's not in our expertise, is talking about tech. So there are tech people out there and we can send you their way, and Sarita can also make a session specifically on tech. What we want to talk about is kind of the values and the goals and what it is we're trying to achieve. The other thing that we're not going to do this evening is we're not going to tell you what's happening in our shuls in particular, though we might share a little bit of the work that we're doing at Aleph and at Shaarei Tzedek, respectively. When Shulamit and I started discussing this session, what we encountered very quickly was that even though we are two shuls 4 miles apart, and dealing with the same context, the same issues of how do we respond to pandemic, and how do we create meaningful tefillah in this context, even though that was the case, we're actually living very different experiences. And that's two shuls which are very close to one another. Of course, it's always been the case that our communities have different cultures and experience and live in and have different prayer lives. But in some ways, that experience has been amplified by the experience of pandemic. So while we're facing different challenges, we have different prayer lives, we have different communal cultures, we have different demographics, different teams, different buildings, different resources available to us. So there are all sorts of reasons that the way that we respond to this as Reformed communities is likely in the end to be different. But there is one thing that Shulamit and I do have, which is a shared commitment and I think acknowledgement that hybridity, that is services which are accessible both online and in person, and multi-access, that is diverse ways of engaging with prayer and synagogue life, that those two will be features of our prayer life moving forwards, whether we like it or not. That actually the reality of our lives is that our communities will become more multi-access, and many communities were already beginning to build in that way before pandemic, and that they will be more hybrid. And of course, many shuls were already beginning to do that work with live streaming beforehand. It's just, again, it's being amplified by the experience of pandemic. So what this evening won't be is a presentation, because in reality, each of our communities can only sort of live its own experience. And what's going to work for me at Aleph is going to be very, very different to what might work for Shaarei Tzedek or for Newcastle or for Cardiff or for Menorah and so on. So what we're interested in doing this evening is really a mutually supportive conversation between leaders of different communities about the challenges that we face and about how we hope we might move forwards. That's our goal for this evening. And what we hope is that we will come to, at the end, some common ideas. And actually what we'd like to do is to there's no handout for this evening, but what we want to do is to build a handout together that we can send to everyone on this screen that reflects what we think we're trying to achieve together as a result of this evening. So that's the plan. That was a bit of a longer introduction than I had hoped, but that's what we're going to do. So the way that we're going to begin is with a guided fantasy. So some people on this screen, I think, have been in a guided fantasy around tefillah that I've run before. It's something that I've done often when looking with colleagues and communities about the way that we can evolve our prayer lives in community. It's a very good way of trying to work out what success looks like. Most often when we do a guided fantasy, what we are doing is looking, just going to mute. Most often what we're doing when we do a guided fantasy is looking slightly longer term. And really the idea is to step away from what we do and the confines of what we do and start thinking about what it might be like. And what we're going to do now is a guided fantasy which is less long term. It's only going to be about what might happen 6 months from now. And of course, it's going to be a guided fantasy where all the questions are given to us by the fact that we've been living through a pandemic together. So this is the bit that people normally go like this to. What I'm going to ask you to do, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for this bit. I'm going to ask you to just be comfortable in your seat and just take a moment to imagine, because really we can only work out what we can do if we begin to imagine what that might be like. So the best way to do a guided fantasy is just to be comfortable, to breathe. You might want to have paper with you, but you're not gonna be asked to write anything until we've done all of this. All I'm going to ask you to do is imagine, to put yourself in the scenario I describe and to imagine it, and to build a picture in your head so that we can work out really what success might look like. So if everyone just takes a moment to breathe, to set yourself, and then I'll take us into our new space to imagine. So I'd like you to invite you to imagine that time has moved on 6 months from now, and that today is Saturday morning, the 12th of December, 2021. It's been a challenging 6 months. Infection rates have risen and fallen. The High Holy Days were really challenging for synagogue leadership. There were moments when we really struggled. We held the needs of community. We lived with uncertainty. We lived with complex expectations. But we have strength that comes from having got through that together as leaders. Personally, there have been a couple of times when we've had to self-isolate. But there have been no scary new variants. And finally, as we get towards the end of the calendar year, social distancing measures are being relaxed, and we're ready to go back fully to shul. Finally, it feels like there is some kind of normality again. Yes, you needed to pre-book for shul this morning, but you can sing inside, you can sit together with other people, and mask wearing is optional. Shul is back. So on this Shabbat morning, you step out into the world with gratitude in your heart. It helps that it's a lovely, crisp winter's day. You can feel the winter sun on your face as you walk towards your synagogue. You get into shul and look around. Who do you see? How were you welcomed into the building? Who is in there and what are they doing? Who's not there? You say hello to some people. In this strange new world, how do you greet one another? What is there in this space that makes it feel like it's safe? Like it's a space that you can relax in after 2 years of being unable to relax? You walk into the sanctuary, into the Beit Tefillah. What does it look like in there? What in there makes it feel like it's shul again? You look around, looking at it with fresh new eyes. What technology is in the space? Are there screens? Are there cameras? Are there people joining you from home? And if so, where are they? Are they in the room with you? Can you see them? And can they see you? The service begins. It feels at once familiar and slightly new. Who is leading? What are they doing? Where are they standing? Is it formal? Is it relaxed? What feels special about this moment? And what are the people around you doing? And how can you tell? If in your community there are people joining you who are not in the building, part of your minyan but away from you, what are they doing? And how do you know? You enjoy the melodies of Shachrit. You enjoy the familiarity of being back in your sense of place with people you love, with melodies that you enjoy. And you come to the Torah service. How is the Torah processed? Can everyone, wherever they are, see the Torah scroll? When it comes to the Aliyot LaTorah, who is called to Torah and how? What about people who are joining from home? Do they have a role? As the service ends, the Shliach Tzibor encourages you, all of you, to look after one another, to be with each other and speak with each other. How are you going to do that? As you move into Kiddush, who is in the room and who is not in the room with you? Who is not able to be with you? And while we're thinking about it, what does Kiddush look like in this new world in your shul? Familiar but strange, you look around with a sense of pride. Pride in the shul that you have accompanied as a leader through the extraordinary challenges of the last 2 years. Pride too in the fact that you've taken this moment, this opportunity to effect transition and still be a community despite your diversity. What are the things that make you proudest? What has made this feel like a successful moment? You step out into the winter sun and humming the tune to Adon Olam to yourself, you start to head for home. It's the following week. It's Saturday morning, the 19th of December, 2021. It's a cloudier day. It's a cloudier day, both in terms of the weather, but also in terms of your experience of the week. During the week, you sat next to someone who tested positive for COVID, and you've been contacted by Test and Trace and asked to self-isolate. It's annoying, because normally right now you'd be on your way to shul. And it's especially annoying because this week of all weeks, you're marking a yahrzeit for someone you loved. So you're a bit frustrated that you're stuck at home. But you also feel lucky because a close COVID contact is no longer something to be scared about, but merely to be irritated by. And lucky too, because you can log on to Zoom. So now you experience tefillah in a different way. You log on to Zoom in this community that you love. What do you see when you log on? Can you see other people in their homes? It's 10 minutes till the service starts. Can you see people in shul? Can you talk to anyone? Has anyone welcomed you into Zoom in the way that you were welcomed into the building last week? The service begins. What can you see? What can you hear? What can you not see that you find hard not to be able to see compared to last week? As the service goes on, is there any way that you can mark the yahrzeit of the person you loved with your community by contributing to the service? As the service ends and the Shliach Tzibor concludes, the community who are in your synagogue building begin to make their way to Kiddush. As they go off, what do you do? Can you go with them? Or is there another space for you? You know what? It's been okay being at home because you can join online still. It's not the same, but you know, 6 months ago, you were in a session where you imagined this, and it's everything that you hoped it could be. This week, just like last week, you feel the sense of pride in the shul that you've helped to accompany through the extraordinary challenges of the last 2 years. And humming the tune to Adon Olam to yourself, you switch off your computer. So we're just going to take a moment to come out of this imagination. I want you to just give yourself time to come gently back into the room. And when you do, after you've done that, just to spend a few moments jotting down some of your images and thoughts. What were some of the answers to your questions that felt particularly important? When you felt that sense of pride in what you've built, what were you proud of? What made it feel 6 months from now that you had been on a successful journey? And looking at it from now, what felt or feels most daunting? What in your imagination feels furthest away? So we'll just take a few minutes to just make some notes for ourselves, and then I'll explain then what's going to happen. Okay, so we're just gonna give you another moment, and then what Sarita is going to do is to just put us into small breakout rooms of just 2 or 3 people, just for 5 minutes or so, just to try and answer those questions in dialogue with someone. The way that we make sense of things, the way that we find meaning is often in dialogue with other people. So we're just going to take some time to share some of our thoughts, what success felt like, what our imaginations gave us. We're just going to take some time to do that with 1 other person or 2 other people before we come back together as a whole group and spend a little bit more time thinking about some of the key features that will feel like success. Welcome back. I hope that you began to have interesting discussions about this question. What we are going to try to do is sort of narrow down a little bit. But before we do that, are there any sort of reflections or thoughts before we do so?
I thought actually there were some great reflections and thoughts that came out of the group I was in, and I wondered whether I can't see where you are now, Eddie. Eddie, I wonder whether you wouldn't mind just sort of just sharing what was important to you, because I just thought that was really, really, I mean, in our group, we have Cardiff and Glasgow, which actually have very similar sort of, in a way, challenges in geography and, issues, in terms of reach and where your members are. Eddie, would you mind just sort of repeating a bit about what was important to you as a leader at this time? Because I found that really interesting and helpful.
We're towards the end, we discussed what our expectations would be when we can go back in. And for me, it was, I want to create something that is all inclusive. So we not only have the people that are physically in the building, but people that are on some form of media. And I want it to be interactive, so they can take a positive part in the service rather than it simply being streamed to them. And there's two reasons for that. One that I put forward. One is because we are a vast community, a very spread community, and I want to have everybody, if possible, inclusive in that. And also it's because we've had Zoom services for the last 18 months, and all of that, we can say our Friday night services have tripled, our Shabbat services have doubled in terms of attendance, and these people, everybody has taken an active part and been willing to participate. And if we take away the Zoom or some form of electronic methodology, simply because we can go back in synagogue, we will be losing and also being, for want of a better word, rude and disrespectful to some of our members that for very personal reasons, physically and other, they cannot turn up at synagogue sometimes regularly or not at all.
Great.
I hope that went across.
Brilliant. So I think, when you shut your eyes and imagine what 6 months from now looks like, actually what you're imagining is a world in which what you're trying to build is a community in which the experience of someone in the room and the experience of someone joining from outside are as equal as possible. They feel like they are both equal experiences. And what we've begun to pull out is some of the factors that will make that feel like that. So one is about participation, the ability to participate both within the physical space and outside. So there's a huge amount of work there to do, both technologically, but also liturgically, to think about what that might mean. We're also recognizing that it's not the same as live stream, because what it requires is that you are seeable and seen in a way which is very equal and different to the live stream experience in which you are external and passive. So when we shut our eyes and imagine 6 months from now, it's a very different model that is there in our spaces, if that's where we're going, or if that's what we're able to try to do. I think my definite feeling is that we can do that. It's going to take a lot of teething, and we're going to have to really work it out and experiment a lot, but that we can definitely do that. Were there other thoughts that people wanted to share about what it looks like when you shut your eyes and imagine 6 months from now, when hopefully we are post-pandemic into a world in which COVID is endemic and our lives are getting somewhat back to normal, about what our communal lives might look like in this kind of dual way?
Josh, I think one of the things that I've been conscious of is that it is incredibly different for different people, never mind different communities. So I was in a group with Darlington and Northwest Surrey. Darlington have a room, or a very small room, so real difficulty with social distancing, which may still be with us for considerable time to come, may not, but we don't know. Menorah, where I am, where we have already started services, test services in the building, and also, live Zooming. But there are different people in our communities. I know that there is some pressure from some to drop Zoom as soon as we can, because of course it's stopping people from coming back to the synagogue, and people are afraid. Some people are genuine, seriously afraid that the numbers of people at our services, and maybe other events as well, will drop significantly because they're all wearing their pajama bottoms and, sitting in there somewhere, either participating or not, but doing it electronically. So I know that there are lots of different pressures of size and shape of communities and differences, and I'm just becoming so aware of you can't please all of the people all of the time, but it would be nice if you please some of them some of the time.
Great. So I think we need to recognize, and I think that's sort of where we began in our conversation, to recognize that the diversity of communal experience and the physical buildings, resource, cultures will have a huge impact on our ability to do this. And what we saw from Eddie is actually there are some shuls which, because of their wide demographic spread, like geographical spread, actually, this is an answer to a question that they didn't know they had, but now they really, it's a real new answer to. Well, there'll be others which have been very bound into that experience of being together, often with very core praying communities who have prayed together for a long time. People who always sit in the same seats, and many of us are that person too. Right? Who for whom this will be a culture shift and a real challenge. And that we know that this may also involve taking people through transition. Remember, change is not the challenge. The transition is the challenge. Once you get there, once you've got to the change, you're fine. Okay, so it's taking people through the transition that's the difficulty. Fiona.
Yeah, I'm one of the people who worries about drop-off in physical attendance, but that's not what we were talking about in the room I was in. It was the question of welcoming people, because when we have services in person, it's really easy to welcome anyone who walks through the door. And in fact, being totally on Zoom, we've been able to do things in a very similar fashion. We chat beforehand, we always welcome newcomers. And the issue of how you achieve that in a Zoom interactive and personal service, because I too don't really want people just to have to watch, is much more complicated. And we're going to need two teams of people, one to be wardens in the building and the other to be the kind of Zoom gabbai, if you like. And that's, I think, is something we're going to need to practice and really think about.
I think what you're also really stressing there, Fiona, is something really deep in your values, and possibly in your community values as well, that the idea there that actually that's a priority is the sense of welcome and connection. And something that I feel that we really do struggle with is that whatever we do, we have to invest such a lot of time in, don't we? So to create that really interactive service that has that moment where people can talk about, for example, it could be individuals who are remote may talk about someone they've lost that they're saying Kaddish for this week, and that would be a very personal moment. And that might be something very deep in the values that you might hold in your community and say, gosh, this is really important to us. But we also know then that means then that's going to need that time and thought and care and planning, because that's the thing that's important to you. And so what we're doing here is, I think we're also identifying the things that are important, and they're not only about what's possible or how many resources or what size room you've got or how many rabbis. It's also about what's important. When Eddie says, I want to see my community I want to kind of reward those and thank those people for supporting us. That's what's important in your space. And so it comes back, I suppose, to, in a way, a really rich discussion about what are the values that we're bringing into this discussion, and where you're going to do the work. Because you're going to find that Zoom gabbai to create the welcome, and you're going to be doing that in real life as well. It means you can't do possibly other things that are vital and important for you over in Cambridge, possibly.
I think you're right, because we kind of pride ourselves that any newcomer to our community does not leave a service without having spoken to at least one other human being.
Yeah.
So there's no one who's just being left to lurk by themselves. And the other thing is, we've made very big use of breakout rooms for kiddish socializing, and the conservation of that social experience when we're mixed and hybrid, I think, is something else that it's important to us to be able to achieve.
Absolutely right. So I think
and
one
it
of
speaks to the same sorts of values, as you say.
Right. So I think one of the things in our little exercise that we did was to recognize that the before and the after is as much a part of the prayer experience as the service itself. So how people come in, how they come in, and how we hold them afterwards. So I think I actually think some of the stuff around welcome is going to be much less complex than Kiddush is going to be, and that the experience of being on Zoom and watching people go to have Kiddush together and trying to work out what the experience will be for someone who is at home, I think that's going to be, I mean, that's one of the places that we are putting thought at the moment, is how we're going to make that work. I mean, obviously we need to work out what Kiddush looks like as well, but that's, you know, like physically what's it going to look like, but actually that question of how does someone join us for Kiddush in a way that when they are on Zoom is going to be a real question. Just to say, there are some big American shuls that even when they were live streaming, they had welcome teams. They'd got it early enough on, they'd worked out that this was going to be a thing. And so I think we're, you know, as often sort of is the case, some of those value statements that we know we have, actually we're only just beginning to pick up on some of what the implications are. We're going to have two more quick ones, then I'm going to hand over to Shulamit, who's going to
maybe what we could do, James, I mean, sorry, Josh.
Yeah, go on. No, go for it.
Is absorb those into the next exercise. I am really sort of conscious of time. Steve and Gabrielle, what we want to do is we want to have a kind of little moment to workshop some of the issues that we have here, and see if you have something that you'd like to bring here that we can all put our heads to and open up in a creative discussion now. So Steve and Gabrielle, do you feel that we can hear from both of you and then hear from anyone else who might like to bring in I'm struggling with this, or I'm wondering about this, or I'm inspired by this, but I don't know about that. Would you feel you could bring that into this stage of the discussion? Steve, I'll ask you first because you put your hand up first, I think. Where are you, Steve?
So I'm from Swessers. So yes, I think, yeah, I can wait. I'll lower my hand.
Okay, well, maybe we'll come back to you. Gabrielle.
That's fine.
Are you going to say, sorry, what does that mean? It's fine, I'm lowering my hand? Or?
Yes, that's fine. Yes, I put down the hand, sorry.
Okay. I don't know if I put you off then. So maybe we'll come back to you both afterwards. Shall we have a look then at, in those discussions, what came out of them around what does success look like? What feels important? I think for me, that's a really, really important question about what is important to you. What feels daunting or worrying? And I'm just wondering if there's, like we have here, something we can look at together in a real life example that any of us is dealing with. Anne has put her hand up.
Yes, we've talked a lot about the people for whom Zoom has been absolutely miraculous and an absolute blessing for the last 18 months or so. And I think we're absolutely right to think about them and how they would be embraced into our services when we are back in our buildings. What we haven't talked about is the people who come back into the buildings, because they need to feel people physically around them. They will need the recreation of the atmosphere that was there before. They will also need to have their emotional and spiritual needs remembered. So I think we need to balance this out a little bit and remember that the people for whom physical worship is very important we should think through what it's going to be like for them as well.
Yeah, and is that something that you've got personal experience of yet, and of actually coming back in?
Not really, no. We now have our rabbi back in the building because to begin with, in lockdown, she had to stay at home because her husband was shielding. Then she and her husband moved back into our building, so we do see them in the building for our services, but we haven't been back into the building as a congregation. We will probably do it very gradually, perhaps start with some Erev Shabbat services and cover our suppers in the gardens, in the grounds. But I think we're going to take it very, very cautiously. I don't see us being back in the building until after, for a lot of us, it's for many congregations.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is, how does it feel when you're back? And of the people here today, how much experience do we have here of actually being back? I'm just wondering. No, I see Warren is shaking his head, Fiona is shaking, Simon raises his hands a little bit, and Sue at Swezes says yes. So should we go over to Sue and Julian? Sue, should we go to you first?
Yeah, so we're probably on, I think, our 8th and 9th hybrid service back in the synagogue. And we started very cautiously. The first service, it was only people that had Yolt sites and the rabbi and the warden team. And then slowly we've been adding people. The last bar mitzvah we went up to about 45 people in the building. And that was probably, and then we also had our rabbis leaving service where we had 60 in the building. So we've gone very slowly and made sure each time we did it, we had our teams in place, because we've got our COVID team at the door taking temperatures. So there's a lot more involved and a lot more volunteers needed. So each stage, we took it stage by stage. We made it absolutely that it had to be 100% inclusive. So we have people in Zoom taking part in the service. At the Rabbis Leading Service, we have 4 people in the shul reading the Torah and 2 people on Zoom reading Torah. So we try and balance it right the way through. What we have found is that the people that have come back are the people that really missed and didn't get as much out of Zoom. And they absolutely, yeah, one of them was almost in tears just to be back of joy. And when you see that sort of thing, it's just so rewarding. But it's how you keep the two sides. We're one of the congregations that absolutely want to be 100% inclusive. But what I would say is each time we did a service, we added a bit more. We didn't go right the way in at the beginning, and we learned a lot each stage throughout the whole process.
Have you been able to really build your volunteer team then through doing this? It sounds like, because that's a huge commitment, isn't it? And was that an opportunity for you, Sue? And how did you manage that?
We're not as successful as we want to be, but it is. We've got some more people on security and volunteering for the COVID teams than we have for the tech team. We're now trying to get our youth involved, because that's something that we feel that they can do. They're used to the PlayStations and the Xboxes, and that's really what the sort of same skill set you need to come across to the tech. So we're just building that team up, but hopefully that will then bring some of our teenagers back in that we lose. So we see this as a golden opportunity to keep a connection with those teenagers.
How did you grow the confidence for everybody to go down this? Because this is a very, it's an expansive project that you've embarked on here at a time of enormous change for you, right? As a synagogue, how did you build that confidence to take those steps together?
Well, I see Steve's unmuted. I don't know if he wants to come in and join the conversation.
I think it was it's a natural thing. We knew we had enough people who wanted to go back, who would make it worthwhile. But one of the things about inclusivity is that, as well as the people of the Zoom being able to see what's going on in the shul, when you're involving remote people taking part in the service, whether it's for an aliyah or read the haftarah or study passage, then the people in shul need to be able to see them as well, because otherwise it's a one-way street and it doesn't work. So you do need screens to, for the shul people to see them. But yeah, I just think it will grow naturally, and I think there will always be people who stay on Zoom. But I do believe that Zoom is the right platform and not just streaming, because I think people do need to be involved in what's going on and not just following something, like watching a film and not participating.
And it sounds like this model really, really reflects from both of you the kind of real sense of values and meaning and purpose behind what you're doing. That comes across,
Yeah, but
sort of very much in line with your values. It's not just a technical discussion.
Yeah, but it's going to cost. No, but it's going to cost us a fortune in the tech.
Oh, okay. So let's go over to Julian now. Julian.
Can I just say one thing? Sorry, the only thing we haven't really thought about is that our kiddush is in a completely different building, and at the moment it's easy because we do it from the bimah, and it's just on at the end of the service, and only the rabbi does kiddush. But what I've learned from tonight is we need to think about how we're going to put something in that other room so that we don't just cut the Zoomers off.
So we need to come back to, I think, Josh at the end, who's going to give us an update on the rules, because Josh is in a good position to tell us what we can and can't do in terms of real in person. So let's make sure that we come back to Josh and we speak about the rules there, and that will help us to sort of think and plan about that. Julian, you were raising your hand. Where are you, Julian?
I'm Glasgow Reform. So there's quite a few of us here. So Natalie, Elaine and I are all involved to different extents in service taking. Natalie has been for many a year. We've only had a small number of services back in the shul, and we don't have the tech yet for streaming or zooming it. We intend to, but we need to speak to a tech consultant about what to do, but also not just a tech consultant. We need to work out what we want. It's probably going to be mainly a fixed camera. So we've just had a few of these things, and as I said, they weren't zoomed, and we have been arguing backwards and forwards about this, because there are our numbers have increased over Zoom, but it's not the same experience, and some of us are worried that if we blend it too well, nobody will come back into shul. And what we have, although we've had people joining the Zoom services who haven't been along to services in shul, sometimes just because they're distant, sometimes because they've got mobility issues and so on. But there are also just people who have just joined us for because their regular shul hasn't had Zoom services. But we haven't really had any membership, people sort of paying membership who didn't pay it before. And one of the worries is that if we make it too comfortable joining in with Zoom, people will just carry on coming along on Zoom, but the shul won't have the money coming in to run itself, because we've still got a building, we've still got to maintain it, and I think I have to say, I do think we need to be including people on the end of Zoom, but I think it's a bit of a pipe dream to think that it's going to be something equal. The reality is, I'm not aware of any electronic platform where you can have people singing along, for instance. So one of the things that's important to some people is, when you're in shul, being able to sing along, not just, yes, you can sing along on Zoom when nobody can hear you, but to actually be part of singing together doesn't work. It's just cacophony.
So Julian, I think one of the things I think might be really, I'd just like to comment, is that we're in a time of dealing with sort of maximum unknowns, and we all start from a place of what we know, right? Which is, we know we can do this, we know we can't do that. We know that we have lots of people coming, and we know that we may have an issue with membership income. And we know that we're good at running Zoom, but we don't know how to bring people back into the building. And those are the places of knowns and certainties that you think what you've been through, what we've all been through in the last year and a bit is unbelievable. But we're at a sort of threshold of a really quite significant unknown, which is how will people react and respond in terms of the real life stuff and coming back in. And you know, the simple reality is that is a genuine unknown, you know, that has to be faced as a genuine question, you know, and I feel like what we're hearing tonight is where some of us will be able to make progress here is by kind of getting really comfortable with the things that are really, really important to each community, and being able to take a small step in that direction and learn in it. But actually what it doesn't take away is, as you say, the profound unknown. You know, what will happen? How will people feel? Is this a threat or not? They're genuine questions, but they're sort of questions that need to be recognized as unknowns, but not where we invest all of our energy. Do you know what I mean? I think we need to invest our energy in where our values and our purposes and our meaning is important.
One of the conflicts we've got, so we're talking about, even once we've got a more blended form of service, that we won't be running Zoom every time.
Yeah,
there are reasons for this. So as I've talked about, we've got people who can't participate, who can't come to shul or can barely come to shul. We've also got people who haven't. We've got quite an old congregation, and not everyone has been able to come along on Zoom. So, and then we've also got a small number of people who are Shomrei Shabbat to the extent that they won't go to a Zoom service, and they're not comfortable even being in shul with the service being streamed.
Okay, so what we're talking about is a kind of bracketing and sectioning of the different offerings that you have. And I think Josh has some experience of that over at A-List. Josh, I'd like to ask you if you can just comment on that, on the potential to offer different things.
I think there are two things I want to say. One is that where I think we are moving many of our communities is to diverse offering, which is not the same week on week. So lots of larger shuls have been doing that anyway pre-pandemic. But actually, I think one of the things that we might be moving towards is the possibility that some weeks are on Zoom, some weeks aren't. It may be that synagogues can't offer hybridity because the technology is not there. So we'll offer an online service one week and an in-person service the next week and alternate. You know, there are ways of doing this. And I think what we need to be careful about is all of this tends to get kind of thrown together into this word blended. But actually they are different concepts. So when we talk about hybrid service, what we mean is a service that's accessed both in person and online. But then there's also multi-access services. That is services that can be different services that can be accessed in different ways. I think, you know, for a shul like mine, which on a normal Shabbat morning would anyway be offering probably 3 minyanim, and is currently offering up to 4 minyanim on any Shabbat morning, some of which with a dedicated online service and 2 hybrid services most Shabbat mornings at the moment. What we will probably be moving towards is some online services as a continuing part of our program for those whose primary form of access will be online. That is, you know, online also then becomes a form of offering that we can give to the world and to our members and to friends alongside some of the other stuff that we do. So I think it's about opening up and being as diverse in this as we can be and as open as we can be, and really thinking about how do we access it in different ways.
Okay, so
can I just say one other thing, Shulamit, which is a number of people have said this concern about will they come back if we offer it online. I think one of the things we have to recognize is probably everyone on this screen is yearning for in-person tefillah, right? And if we are, so are many of our members and so are many of our friends. We know that they will be qualitatively different experiences. I think we may end up with slightly smaller communities. We may end up with less regular communities. I think probably the guys who we know will always sit in the same place will be back sitting in the same place as soon as they possibly can, because that's the reality of synagogue life. But I think having the confidence to know that we can offer all of these things and people will come, I think will be very important. I know I have the benefit of a large congregation, but I really am incredibly confident in all of our synagogues in their ability to hold these things in unison with each other. So the question that you asked, Julian, which is about how do you monetize that, I'd love to know the answer to.
What we're saying is then that we know that, for example, I certainly think my experience is hybrid services take the most time, effort, work, planning time, volunteering, coordination, wardening time, preparation, and so on. It's not possible, perhaps if it's not possible to do that all the time, that actually having an offering that is different across a month or across a 2 or 3 month period also might enable us to have the energy and the time to offer that range where we're smaller and we don't have all those resources. So it does mean then a kind of having to say no to something in order to say yes to something else. Simon, you'd like to talk to us about your experience of being back. Should we come over to you now and then you share with us how it's felt like for you to be in person? I think that's what you want to talk about, but it might be something else.
Well, there are 2 points. One is, I'm afraid you can't uninvent Zoom. And if you think you can, then I think history will show that you are wrong. And I think you have to be very careful, because I think Zoom, now that people are aware of it and it can be used, and it is being used in our synagogues, to shut it off would be just cutting off your nose to spite your electronic face. But I wanted to talk about, in fact, what it's like coming back into the synagogue when things are different. And I have to tell you, it's not particularly good. You walk in, and we walk in through a different door, because we've got a one-way system. You wash your hands. Somebody says, oh, you haven't put your mask on. Will you put your mask on, please? And you're then escorted to a chair amongst 20 or 30 chairs dotted around a relatively large space, in our case. And you sit down and you look around and you acknowledged a few people who you recognize and a few people who you don't. And you sit around because you don't feel like you want to call out to anybody, because you've been told you shouldn't really be shouting out to anybody. So you sit there stumm, waiting for the service to begin. And the service is a familiar service in our case. And we also have a blended service, so people can contribute from home. And we have 2 screens on either side of the bima, because we're lucky, actually, we have 2 walls and 2 projectors. So we can see the people and we can hear them, and they can see and hear us as well. So that's the good news. But the atmosphere in the building is entirely different. The doors and the windows were open, and our first service was in the cold spell in April. Yes, that's right. Yes, it was freezing and people objected, oh, it's very cold. And we said, yeah, it was cold. And the services was as it was. And then we were escorted, almost literally escorted, out of the building, because that's what the rules say. And the service was a bit shorter than usual, not a lot shorter, I have to be honest, but a bit shorter than usual. And then you're, as it were, ushered out of the building, go home, please, or stand in the car park away from each other. So the experience of coming back for many of us was lovely to be in the building again, yes, but was a disappointment in terms of the overall experience, because it was different from what we have been used to.
Simon, can I ask you a question? What was the emotion? Can you just name some of the emotions that you experienced?
There was some excitement and relief and happiness at getting back.
Yeah.
But because the experience was different, there were some of us, not all, some of us who were disappointed. Because it didn't, because, you know, we'd after 15 months out of the building, we were coming back into the building and it was a different experience. It wasn't there was a level of uplifting undoubtedly for some.
Yeah, so I would sort of, and I do kind of identify quite a lot with what you're saying. And I think that something that I recognize so much that I think we struggle with in this whole time of electronic connection is the emotional experience, which we probably found extremely strange at first when we came into the Zoom world. And then we adjusted to that. And now we're adjusting to this other world. So I'm just noticing that kind of theme that is arising for you, and I've certainly experienced that, is the strangeness, and you use the word disappointment, excitement and disappointment. I would also say loss. I think there are losses here that have to be identified. And it's almost as if we need to ritualize that, that we need to build a presence that meets our emotional needs in this new environment, because actually it can be great and it can be really difficult as well. And how do we do that? How do we can explicitly do that? I'm conscious of the time now, and something that I'm asked to do now is like that we would kind of, in a way, look at some of those key themes. And I'm aware that Fiona has her hand up, so maybe just come back to you very briefly in a minute, Fiona. But I think maybe we could agree between us that some of the themes that we've are touching on are certainly a lot of questioning about where's the future going, uncertainty, issues around interactivity and connection seems to be really, really important, and where we feel strong and able to do that, but where we're not quite there yet, actually quite a worry, quite a real practical and logistical worry. And then when we come back into the space, quite a significant mixture of emotions and experiences, and perhaps not always as we'd hoped it to be, but sometimes, yes, sometimes are, I think, managing to make those experiences as we might want them to be. It might be sort of helpful, actually, Josh, if we can just briefly touch on what is working for us.
So I think, I mean, I would just love to add another theme, which is I've been listening to people this evening, and I'm actually in awe of the people on the screen, because because we're about to go through another transition, and to take communities through the one transition that we've taken them through was exhausting and hard work. To then commit ourselves to doing it all over again in the way that everyone on this screen has done. Actually, I'm in awe of everyone on this screen. You know, there were lots of parts of the religious world that essentially just shut up shop or refused to change, and didn't engage with technology in the way that we have. To be a part of the Jewish world, which is in the religious world, which is quite so ambitious and so open to that transition, I really just think it's an extraordinary thing, and we need to acknowledge how wonderful that is, and how lucky actually the communities that you lead are to have people in leadership who are willing to have this conversation. I'm also in awe of the values that are underpinning this. This isn't about you know, money has come up, concerns about membership have come up, but actually what this is about is a commitment to tefillah as like a core part of our Jewish lives, our religious lives, and a commitment to making tefillah open and accessible to as many people as possible. And that also is something which we should not underestimate. I think, you know, very often we kind of focus on the weight on our shoulder, and sometimes we have to kind of give ourselves that kind of pat on the back and the cheer that says, actually, there is something really amazing happening here. It may be incredibly hard. What I know is Menorah didn't say, oh, this was difficult, we're not doing it anymore. They said, this was difficult, we're going to keep trying, and we'll try and make it better, and we'll get used to it, and we'll do new things. And just as we all did in March, April of last year. And I think that's, you know, I think to recognize that resilience is really something very special. So I do want to name that. So Fiona, do you just want to kind of come in, and then
Well,
what I'd like to do is just finish.
Yeah,
Sure, go
I
on.
want to chime in with what you were saying, because we got lucky. Our very first Zoom service was a howling success. And I have to say, I have loved Zoom. I've got a Taurus scroll in the house that belonged to my dad, and I've been very lucky. But I think we must not be afraid of experimenting going forward. We're kind of in a mindset where we have to have something ready on a certain date, and we have to deliver it, and it's got to be right. It probably won't be right. And for smaller communities where tech is often a big issue, experimenting with alternating an in-person service one week and then a Zoom service the next week to see how it feels and who comes and. Yep. I think we mustn't be afraid of that. But we're kind of validated by certainty, and we're all uncomfortable when we can't be certain, which is really what you're saying, Josh.
Absolutely.
And so I would support the tried out mentality where we can. That's all.
Right. So I think one of the mantras that I have with my team is that experimentation is strategy, which is a bit, it's a bit of a pompous way of saying just try stuff. Like, let's just try things and see how they work. And as long as once we've tried it, we review it properly, we do proper after action review, we really think about what went well and what went badly and what the costs were. Actually, as long as we're doing that, what we're doing is our job. I've never been one for trying to strategize. What I've been one for is experimentation to try to get to a place which feels better, and incremental improvement. So I think I love the idea that we have a goal in mind and we know what the values are and what feels important, which is what we were trying to identify. But actually, once you've got those core values, then it's about experimenting and trying new things. And every week doing it a little bit better, which I think has been the experience for most of our shuls over the last 15 months. Is actually, we all did this thing at the beginning with sort of laptops that we held up like this, and then we worked out that we could put them down on a table, and then we worked out that we could buy a camera that went on the laptop, and then we worked out that we could actually get a video camera and we could plug that into a laptop, and then we realized that we could, and so on. Like, actually, most shuls went through that journey of incremental change at the beginning, and most shuls, if we're brave, will go through that journey of incremental change through this transition as well. I hope in the knowledge that most of our congregants will go on that journey with us and be forgiving of us, right? Certainly the ones who we love. Like, so, I'm going to talk about your dad very quickly, Fiona. So I always say about Jerome that I don't think he liked a single thing I ever did, but he always supported my right to try it. And I think that's, I think most of our congregants are actually like that. Most of our congregants actually just want to see us trying to build meaningful communal life, and are willing to, as long as we're articulate about what we're doing, as long as we explain what we're trying to do, they will give us the benefit of the doubt. Right? I really believe that. And most of them, what they want to see is thriving community.
Yeah. I think you're being a bit hard on yourself, but I think...
We never showed it.
But the business of communication is really at the heart of this, isn't it?
I agree. Absolutely. Okay, I just want to say a little bit about where we are, and then we'll take a few final things. So obviously at the moment, a lot of this is, we're sort of in this liminal state at the moment between now and the 19th of July. So one of the things that I do as part of my work is on behalf of the Reform movement. So on your behalf, I sit on the Places of Worship Task Force, which is the group that meets with government about COVID regulations, along with the Bishop of London and representatives of the Catholic Church and Muslim community and so on. We are currently in a position where places of worship can be open. It has been permitted for places of worship to be open throughout since the first lockdown when we weren't, and then the second lockdown when we were sort of, and then throughout this lockdown we've been allowed to. If we are having people back in our buildings though, every organization needs to do a full risk assessment. So we are responsible for the risk assessment. So when Simon describes the experience of bringing people in, what he's describing is Menorah's risk assessment has resulted in a series of protocols which mean that they feel comfortable bringing people in that way. Not all synagogues have the same buildings, not all synagogues have the same risks, and therefore the protocols will be different for each community. But if you are thinking about reopening, and want to do a risk assessment, then Sarita can help you. Sarita has risk assessment templates and can do that work a little bit with you and can guide you on how it works. Currently, what they are now calling NPIs, non-pharmaceutical interventions, have to be part of our risk assessment and our protocols. That is social distancing, the requirement that people are at least 1 meter, but ideally 2 meters separate from one another, and particular attention to ingress and egress. That is how you get people in and how you get them out. And again, Simon described the experience of Menora's way of dealing with that. The biggest challenge that we currently have as communities is that congregational singing is not permitted inside. So many communities have decided not to reopen because singing is such a fundamental part of the work that we do, that actually to meet inside and be telling people not to sing feels like it is actually counterintuitive or actually counterproductive. Right? However, congregational singing is permitted inside. Outside, okay, right? So therefore, a community like mine, we've been running services throughout this period, but outside. And I've got sunburned during leading services, and I've led services where at the end of it, I haven't been able to pick up my guitar because it's been so cold that my fingers are frozen. And people have come wrapped up in jackets and under umbrellas, and we've just, we've lived through that experience together. And actually, one of the things I would share is, for us, there's been a real value in not doing it in the Beit Tefillah, so that we haven't experienced what Simon has experienced. Actually, we decided to do it in a very, very different way, because by doing it in a very different way, no one could compare, no one felt that sense of comparison to what they'd done before. And we were lucky enough to have a bit of outside space to do that. When you are doing a risk assessment, there are a number of different factors that you need to bear in mind. So one of the easy ways to think about this is there's 4 Ds and a V. The 4 Ds being distance, that is how far apart people are from each other. Direction, everyone should be facing the same way. Duration, that is the service should be shorter than normal. And there's another one, distance, direction, duration. I'll come back to it. And then the V is ventilation. And actually that real thing about making sure that our spaces are well ventilated. I'll have to come back to you. I'm going to grab out my notes. I'm very proud of my 4 Ds, and I've forgotten what one of them is.
It could be dovening.
It's not dovening, unfortunately.
Is it decibels?
No, I can't think what it is. I'll need to look at. That's good. 5 Ds and 1 V. Decibels I like. So we just need to be kind of aware of that, of those things being really worth consideration. So when we start, if you have not yet started doing stuff in person, then the reform movement is there as a resource to you to help you think those things through. I am very happy if anyone wants to email me about what the state of the current regulations is, which I'm sort of on top of-ish. I know that Sarita is really there as a resource for things like risk assessments. Okay. But clearly we are beginning the journey back in. And obviously the key part of that is also the high holidays. That we're all sort of also planning for what the high holidays might look like in September. It's unfortunate that it's the earliest high holidays in a long time. I don't know many members of clergy who don't feel sick at the moment, just about here at the moment for this stuff. Okay. It's 9:25. We've got a couple of hands still up. So Julian and then Simon, and then we'll hand over to Sarita to sort of follow, close us. Julian.
I just wanted to say, I love what you said about experimentation, but in practical tech terms, for a small congregation, it's quite expensive to fork out on something that you then find isn't right. So we'd quite like to learn from other people's experience. The other thing is one of my worries. I mean, I tend to take services. I'm not somebody who tries to be in charge very much because I couldn't organize, what. But we definitely have a problem. I mean, it's hard enough finding people to do security. It's hard enough finding people to do wardening, etc., etc. And the blended service is going to need pretty much double the number of people essentially supporting the service, and we just haven't got the people stepping forward for it, and I don't know what we're going to do about it. It's a real struggle. I mean, security before COVID, even when people were directly asked and told that they needed to do it, had flat refusals. And the same's been the issue with, because we found that we needed people to do tech, to actually just be sitting there doing tech for Zoom services, and we've had people who have got perfectly good capabilities who flat refused, and it's fallen on a very small number of people, and it's very tiring and very stressful, I have to say.
It sounds to me like that's a kind of community leadership issue that will kind of run through everything that you're doing, Julian. And it's almost as though that what we experience, I suppose, in these times is a kind of intensification of our existing community life. You know, whatever's an issue for us in our community lives, it is getting like a little bit more intensified. So, you know, I imagine that's a kind of community leadership issue that runs through everything, and that's hard, you know. But just coming back to what we heard really positively at the beginning is your amazing success at running things online with fantastic increase in participation, and that's something, you know, holding on to that is really, really important. Simon, you had a final comment as well.
Yes, I hope that I can lighten the atmosphere just slightly by saying that you do a risk assessment, and you make a list of all the possible risks, and you think about anything and everything. And then a week last Saturday at one of our in-person services, just as you're coming to the end of the Amida, the fire alarm goes off. And after a few moments hesitation, you'll be pleased to know that we successfully evacuated the building. Incorrectly, we went the wrong way, but let's not worry about that. And everybody got to the end of the car park. And then only about half an hour later, 30 minutes later, did we realise that Manchester Fire Brigade has changed its way it operates, and they did not arrive at the premises. They will not, well, we didn't know this, nobody had told us. And so after all the work we've done on the risk assessments for COVID, we've actually about to change our procedure about fire risk and fire alarms, because we found out by luck, for a false alarm as it turned out to be, that the procedure from the local fire brigade has changed in recent months. They will not come out unless someone dials 999 and says there is a fire.
Gosh. So, sorry, Shulamit, can I just,
Yeah.
so I think one thing I would take from that is we've been doing various in-person things for a few months. I don't think a week has gone by that we haven't revisited our risk assessment, right? These things are not set in stone. They're things that we write and develop as we work and as we learn more about the experience itself. You know, we are, on Thursday, I'm sending out whole new protocols for our Bar Mitzvah classes, which are back in person, because last week we learned something. And actually that, you know, I think it is incredibly intensive. It is a huge piece of work that we're being asked to do. I know for you, most of you as volunteers, whereas, you know, some of us as professionals. But it is a learning experience, and it is something where we get better in increments. By the way, the fourth D is density. That was the one I forgot. Distance, density, duration, direction. They're the ones about how you fill the room. Ventilation, decibels, apparently, for singing and noise. And so the only other thing I want to say that I forgot to say is also just to remember the test and trace implications. So we're also legally responsible. If you're letting people into your building, you are responsible for ensuring that if someone reports a COVID positive test, you are informing those who've been in close contact with them. And so
another D, documentation.
Documentation, right? Absolutely. So it's a real thing to think about. Sarita, do you want to close? It's 9:31. So
I mean, I was just really loving writing down all the Ds, and for quite a few minutes wondering where the fire brigade actually went if they weren't attending the building. But I'm glad to know that you just have to call 999. That is logical. Thank you so much to Josh and Shulamit. I have found this really interesting. It had not even for a moment occurred to me about things like having a welcomer on Zoom and thinking about how you do Kiddush separately, and really the practical implications for how you run a Torah service. And for anyone who is struggling with the tech, we have communities who are doing it well and who are doing it on a budget, and are various people who are only too willing to share their experiences, which I can absolutely put you in touch with, probably individual ones. I'm loving this, bustling people out the way to get the Zoom Kiddush. Good luck with that one. If anyone has any further questions, Josh or Shulamit or myself will be only too happy to help. You should probably come to me first, because these wonderful rabbis have full-time jobs with their own communities, and my role is really to support you, and myself and Amit are really very, very happy to do that. Thank you all. If you have any questions, hopefully, I'm just going to pop, I think you all have my email address. If you don't have mine, you have Amit, you have one of us, we're interchangeable.
Sarita, would it be possible for you to save the chat and send it out, because there were quite a few email addresses and links with useful ideas in there, and if you're not a co-host, you can't save the chat.
Gotcha. I think there's and I've just seen chats that I've been sent, so I'll do that.
Thank you.
Julian, you're on mute.
Just the three dots at the bottom of chat. If you right click on it, you'll see you can save chat locally.
Oh yeah, I just copy and paste into a Word document. Control A, Control C, Control V. I've literally just done that now into my open notes. That's how I save the chat, as always. Thank you all. It's been really fascinating. And if you have more support needs, do call myself or Amit, and we'll be only too happy to help. It tends to be more, this is my kind of thing more than Amit's, because it's my fascinating geek zone. But really very, very happy to help you all. And thank you for being with us this evening. Good luck.
Thanks, Sarita.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Shulamit.
Thank you everybody. It's great to talk with everyone.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.